case from which you're about to see further edited highlights is a very fictitious one, and the proceedings are not as legally accurate as they might have been in the hands of a more competent writer. The characters in it are played by actors, and the jury is made up of people who've expressed their willingness to arrive impartially at any verdict required of them. It is a complex and unusual case, now in its fourth day, concerning the siting of lavatories for an old people's home some 3,000 feet below the building which they were designed to serve, thus subjecting the old-age pensioners to considerable trouble and inconvenience. It is the task of counsel for the plaintiffs, who are alleging libel against them on the part of their clients in respect of this, to minimise the gravity of the error, and thereby show that the charge of gross incompetence is unfounded. The credibility of an expert witness depends upon the effectiveness with which counsel is able to establish his credentials at the very outset by skillful and subtle questioning.
You are your Professor Upshot, and you occupy the chair of comparative geriatry at the University of Wakefield.
Oh, yeah, that is true, yes.
You're the author, are you not, of a number of books, some of which are addressed to a wider public. Ill-lit by moonlight,
yes.
My encounter with the largest hippopotamus in the world, being perhaps the best known of these.
Oh, yes, that is the one that my popular reputation is based upon, I think, yes.
You're also the author of the standard work on high-altitude geriatry, yes. Which has gone into a number of editions and been translated into numerous foreign languages, and which has become something of a textbook for students on the subject, called Mountaineering at 90, Dream or Reality.
Yes, it runs the other one a close second.
You're not uninstructed, therefore, in these matters, and might indeed be said to be a worldwide authority on the effect of altitude upon the elderly.
Yes, I would go as far as to say that, yes.
Would it be true to say that the governments of Nepal and Afghanistan were interested in the experiment being carried out at this spot in the Cairngorms, and that they were in particular interested in the light it might shed on the problems of establishing old folks' homes in the Himalayas and elsewhere?
Oh, there were deputations from all parts of the world. The Andes was another area where high-altitude geriatry was of prime concern.
The high spots of the world.
Oh, yes.
The necessity in those regions of acclimatizing the elderly to the making of journeys up and down sheer and relatively sheer rock faces might well be exercising the governments of these countries, might it not?
Oh, yes, it was the number one topic.
So that, in order for the pilot scheme being tried out here in the Cairngorms to be of use in the widest possible way, it would make absolute sense, by placing the lavatories at the bottom, to ensure that data might be forthcoming as to the feasibility of such journeys up and down.
Oh, absolute sense. It was the crux of the whole exercise.
An imaginative way, in fact, of achieving a sound and useful objective.
It was the one thing that commended the scheme to those of us who were invited to look at it at an early stage.
And to what extent is 3,000 feet an acceptable height when elderly people are called upon to make the journey both up and down several times a day as well as during the night?
Oh, by no means unacceptable, given a certain degree of fitness, of course.
Fitness by no means beyond the reach of, for example, his lordship, or of such of the old-age pensioners who are in court at the moment.
Oh, yes, indeed, yes.
It has been said that you are as young as you feel, and that the secret of eternal youth is available to any one of us who chooses to open his mind to it.
Queen Victoria is an example here, I think.
It has been plausibly suggested, has it not, that even as quite an old woman, Queen Victoria, who harboured a secret longing to wheel a wheelbarrow through streets broad and narrow, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh, and, in fact, to do so, moreover, at dead of night, did, in fact, on numerous occasions, succumb to this craving.
It's not too fanciful to imagine the scene where the sleeping populace of Windsor were awakened from their beds to cheer her as she did so.
Cheer her, indeed, until they were hoarse before, after a quick gargle, returning to bed and sleep once again.
Oh, indeed.
It might well be, might it not? It might be this kind of activity that was the secret of her eternal youthfulness.
I simply cannot go along with this blatant leading of the witness. It's a waste of public money to bring him here at great expense if all he has to do when he gets to court is to find various ways of answering yes.
I stand corrected, my lord.
Are we cross-examining?
With your lordship's permission.
By all means.
Would it be true to say that it makes nonsense of the whole notion of high-altitude geriatry if old-age pensioners on their journey back to bed in the small hours miss their footing and finish up in heaps at the bottom?
It may well be taken into account as a possibility when constructing a home of this kind. Indeed.
I put it to you, it was not only not so taken in this instance, but that it was blatantly, either by negligence or design, ignored as a possibility.
Oh, by no means. It may well be taken into account as a possibility and then ignored.
A calculated risk.
A risk worth taking in view of the purpose behind the whole exercise, which was in part to discover the effects of such minor oversights in developing buildings of a similar nature.
Thank you.
I have no further witnesses, my lord.
That is your case.
It is, my lord.
It is now for the defence to open its case. Now, whilst we're waiting for this to happen, this might be the moment to go outside the courtroom where witnesses are waiting to be called for other cases which are going on in the same building concurrently with our own and are passing the time in small talk.
The bottom seems to have fallen right out of horse brasses.
Right out. Never seen anything like it.
I should be out looking for the wife. Left this message on the table for me. I'm being held prisoner in my Lake Isle of Innisfree by W.B. Yeats.
He can be had up.
It's death trap, that place.
But they can usually look after themselves, women.
I remember the Queen went missing once.
Counsel for the defence has now opened his case and is questioning his first witness, an experienced mountaineer.
Am I right in saying that you are an experienced mountaineer?
Yes.
Of several years' standing.
Indeed.
Perhaps you would take a look at the model here in the well of the court and show us by means of the model the relative positions 3,000 feet apart of the old people's home and the lavatories serving it.
To what extent can this be described as the same model as heretofore?
It has sustained damage, my lord, and certain corrections may have to be made in respect of the scale.
What is the extent of the damage?
It was sat upon whilst in safekeeping, my lord.
Sat upon?
Yes, my lord.
I see.
There's also some marmalade, my lord, in one or two of the interstices, which has arrived there somewhat mysteriously. It points to there having been a moment, possibly more than one, when the model was the subject for discussion over the breakfast table. Or perhaps it was being used for some other reason, such as to prop up a copy of a daily newspaper.
Where is this marmalade?
Not in any vital spot, my lord.
Does the marmalade invalidate the model in any way?
Not significantly, no, my lord. There are also some crumbs of toast. But these are a non-strategic area, so far as the case is concerned, and it is my submission it need not trouble us if the defence agrees.
I'm perfectly happy.
Yeah.
Oh, well, as long as the model was in safekeeping at the time, which I understand it was, none of this furnishes any sound reason. Once the necessary corrections have been made, why it should not continue to be used.
I'm obliged to your lordship.
Perhaps you could indicate the route which would have to be taken by an old-age pensioner taken short in the night.
Well, of course, the mountain itself, which they would have to negotiate, has now been sat upon. But allowing for that, it would be up here. Around this bit. Then they would have to negotiate round the overhang.
Which is not easy in bedroom slippers.
Virtually impossible.
May he be shown Exhibit 2. Perhaps you would give us your expert opinion on the effectiveness of bedroom slippers when these have been modified in some such way as we see done in this instance and fitted with crampons.
Under ice or snow, these would be virtually useless. Precipitate an avalanche and cover anyone who was on the throne under a few 100,000 tons of snow.
Not a happy eventuality, perhaps, for the unfortunate person so visited.
Never sit on the throne again with a quiet mind.
It might be said, in fact, that these bedroom slippers are all right for anyone negotiating a rock garden in full daylight. Worse than useless for the sort of terrain we are concerned with here.
I wouldn't wear them. Put it that way.
So, that in other words, the route is in your view an impossible one, even when there is no such distortion as on the model here.
Out of the question.
Thank you.
A formidable line of argument, which has clearly impressed the jury, and which it will now be for the plaintiffs to attempt to demolish in cross-examination.
You say you found this route an impossible one.
Virtually impossible.
Would it be true to say that a mountain goat could negotiate it without any difficulty at all?
I'm not familiar with the habits of mountain goats.
It would be a reasonable supposition, though, would it not, from what you know of mountain goats?
I dare say a mountain goat will make a reasonable stab at it, yes.
In other words, a mountain goat could do so, and yet an old-age pensioner made in the image of God as he is unable to do what a mere goat, not so fortunate to have been made in God's image, can do with one hoof tied behind his back, so to speak.
A mountain goat can do precious little else but leap about on mountains. That's what it's there for.
And what you're saying, then, amounts to, correct me if I'm wrong, that though the structure known as Bellamy's Folly may be perfectly acceptable as a home for goats who are past their prime, it is to be denied to God's children in their declining years because they're in some way inferior in not being able to reach lavatories which have been placed at the bottom with quite the dexterity with which a goat might do so.
It's not a question of being inferior.
You drew our attention to the overhang. How, in fact, would a qualified mountaineer negotiate such an overhang?
Well, one would first find a toehold. Then give a sort of a heave. And Bob's more or less your uncle.
When you say more or less your uncle, is he your uncle or isn't he?
It depends, my lord, on the nature of the overhang and the strength of the heave.
Would it not be true to say that Bob is in fact your uncle?
Depends which Bob you're referring to.
Well, which Bob are you referring to?
I was referring to a hypothetical Bob.
A hypothetical Bob, who I suggest is as much your uncle as your uncle is, if not more so.
With respect, my lad, I would suggest we are being led here on something of a wild goose chase.
Yes. Where is this line of questioning leading?
I shall be in a better position to say, my lad, when we've got there.
Well, I think we're chasing a blind goose up a wild alley and might well adjourn at this point. We will resume at 2 o'clock.
It seems that counsel may have cooked his client's goose at this juncture. If so, he has now no alternative but to lie on it. We shall see. As we come back at a somewhat later stage in the hearing, counsel has just finished his examination of his second witness, an old-age pensioner who has sustained injury by falling several hundred feet and missing the mattresses placed at the bottom. Counsel for the plaintiff is about to cross-examine.
We've heard your story as to how you came by the injuries you sustained, which is that you missed your footing and fell in consequence some several hundred feet down the mountainside.
That's right.
I would like to suggest to you that your injuries were in fact sustained in a quite different manner.
No. I fell from this ledge and missed the mattress at the bottom.
Let me take you back a number of years to the time when you were quite a young man, 20 years old, in fact. At that time, like a number of other young men who were affected by the same craze, you were bitten by the bug, if I could put it, of ventriloquism.
I dabbled.
Ah, you dabbled, but with scant success, I fancy.
Well, I never got to the top.
I would put it to you, never even rose from the bottom.
Well, it wasn't for the want of trying.
It is by no means clear what line of argument is being pursued here, and the judge is himself obviously far from certain.
In recent years, the memory of that failure has come increasingly to irk you, has it not? To the extent that you've begun, in a somewhat clandestine manner, to take it up again, retiring behind closed doors in order to try, not altogether successfully, once more to throw your voice from one end of the room to the other.
The doors were not closed.
Neither were the windows, I venture to suggest.
What have the windows got to do with it?
My contention is that they were open, my lord, and that witness, whose voice is a very powerful one, might well, in endeavouring to throw his voice, have found his voice instead throwing him.
Was this an upstairs room?
It was sort of upstairs.
And you went out through the open window whilst your voice, which was more powerful than you thought it was, remained where it was in the room across which you were trying to throw it.
I landed in the flower bed.
I see.
These injuries, in short, were sustained in a manner totally at variance with the ones that you've described to us.
Some of them might have been.
And the story, therefore, of your fall, having fallen from a ledge several hundred feet up in the Cairngorms, is the purest fabrication from beginning to end.
Well, I suppose it could be.
Thank you.
Consternation. It is by no means usual for a witness to admit to quite such blatant perjury in the witness box and while under oath, and it is something which will clearly have to be dealt with elsewhere and at some other time. Meanwhile, as the effect of this extraordinary admission dies down, the hearing continues. There is a slight interruption at this point as a witness attempts to force his way into the witness box. He is clearly in a state of some distress, and the hearing must go into abeyance for a few moments for his needs to be attended to as a matter of urgency. Judge and counsel are in conference over the most suitable way to deal with the emergency, as witness, bursting with evidence which he obviously cannot keep bottled up for very much longer, strives as best he can to contain himself.
You represent Lactic Dairies?
That is so.
And should have been here yesterday?
Yes.
To give evidence in a totally different case?
I was led to understand I could give evidence on this case instead.
Why were you not in court yesterday when you were required?
Having trouble with one of our roundsmen, my lord.
In what way?
He was playing ducks and drakes, not to put too fine a point on it, my lord, with his milk float.
Is this really serious enough to prevent your coming here to give evidence?
The float, my lord, is by way of being the tradesman's badge of office. It's held by him on trust for the duration of his tour of duty. He is the temporary custodian.
When you say he was playing ducks and drakes with it, what does this mean in plain terms?
Not to beat about the bush, my lord. Mince words in any way. He'd gone down to Brighton on it.
Well, is it not in the nature of this milk float that it is open to abuse in this way?
We do our best to prevent it, my lord.
What evidence is it that this witness is proposing to give?
It is in respect of a case of assault and battery, my lord, involving a husband and wife.
It's highly irregular that a witness called to give evidence in one case should come to court expecting to be accommodated on a different day in another. If evidence cannot, for whatever reason, be given at the proper time and in the proper place, it must be bottled up until such time as there is a similar case of the same kind.
The witness is clearly in a state of some distress, my lord.
How long will it take you to get whatever it is out of your system?
A couple of minutes, my lord, depending upon the questions.
Very well. And in future, you will make sure that you're here when you're required. Give your evidence to counsel, and I shall instruct the jury to ignore it accordingly.
Thank you, my lord. I'm much obliged to you. It's a great relief.
Where were you on the night of the 24th of August last year?
I was on holiday in Scotland.
And could not therefore have been able to witness a case of assault and battery in Wanstead?
No.
Thank you.
No questions, my lord.
You can stand down.
A second old-age pensioner, Mrs. Olga Freetumble, has been called by counsel and is now likewise being cross-examined by plaintiff's counsel, who is deploying a neat and intriguing line of argument.
Old-age pensioners, we are given to understand, making the journey, sometimes in the middle of the night, and missing their footing, show a tendency to arrive at the bottom with undue suddenness.
Oh, they do. I did myself.
Which is disconcerting, and could indeed be fatal.
It really was.
We've all heard the story, have we not, of the clumsy housemaid who, dropping a plate or a cup to the floor, where it smashes beyond repair, is heard to exclaim indignantly, "But I only let go of it for a split second." Whereupon she receives the retort, "It's enough, Mavis."
Yes?
Now, it well may be, may it not, but for the force of gravity, that plate or cup could have remained intact to this day.
No reason why not.
It is now some 300 years or so, is it not, since gravity was discovered by Sir Isaac Newton.
Well, I suppose that would be so.
Indeed, he had been hunting high and low for it, had he not over a considerable period of time.
I wouldn't know about that.
And the search was finally crowned with success, if legend is to be believed, when he came upon it, so we are told, in the back of a boot and shoe cupboard, to which he'd gone in search for something else, and saw it crouching down behind, so they say, a roll of linoleum, swathed from head to foot in some kind of curtain material, doubtless hoping thereby to be mistaken for Henry Irving in A Midsummer Night's Dream. A vain hope, as it turned out, for Sir Isaac recognised it at once and made the famous remark, "You are the force of gravity, and I claim my £5. Now, had he not had the presence so to do, it is possible that gravity may have eluded him, and that, in consequence, we might still be looking for it.
I suppose that could be true, yes.
Where is this line of questioning leading?
I was endeavouring to demonstrate, my lord, that the force of gravity is a significant factor here, and that the lion's share for the blame for the witness's injury must be laid fairly and squarely at the door of Sir Isaac Newton, since it was his discovery of gravity in the 17th century that may be said to have set in motion the course of events which have culminated in these injuries. And that if this be so, my clients are blameless in the matter.
Is it your contention that if the force of gravity were done away with, no harm would have befallen these unfortunate people?
It is my submission, my lord, that they would have been able to take their time getting both down and up.
This is a line of argument so potentially damaging to the defence that counsel must lose no time in scotching it.
Many is the time, I dare say, when all of us, in a moment of exasperation, as a precious vase or ornament has fallen to the floor and smashed beyond repair, have said to ourselves, "To hell with gravity and all its works." You must indeed have uttered some such expostulation yourself, I imagine.
Oh, yes, many a time.
That gravity is holding the universe together, is it not?
Well, so they say.
So that were your wish, and those of countless others in like circumstances, to be granted, and gravity be indeed done away with, the universe would forthwith fall apart at the seams, and you and I would wake up one fine morning, only to find ourselves stepping out of bed into empty space.
Oh, I suppose that could be so, yes.
There are those who might in such a situation be disposed to say, what's happened to the flaming universe all of a sudden? It seems to have disappeared off the face of the earth. Adding, perhaps as an afterthought, it must have gone round to its Auntie Flo's for some reason, doubtless having heard of a death in the family and wishing to offer its condolences. And its being early closing day at the butcher's would lend some plausibility to such an assumption, since there could be little other reason for its absence.
Well, I wouldn't know about that.
At all events, no matter with what fervour one might on occasion wish gravity to the devil, the disappearance of the universe would be something that, as an old-age pensioner, you would not greatly appreciate being saddled with, having enough to contend with already in these inflationary times.
Oh, no. I wouldn't like to do without the universe.
You'd kick up a bit of a stink, in fact, to use a homely expression.
I think it would be a liberty.
You think it would be a liberty?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
On that somewhat unsettling note, we must leave Crown Court for today. Join us tomorrow for another instalment in the case of Cosmic Planning Consultants versus the Rosenberg Research Foundation.